Reboots and remakes are nothing new, and Bethesda have certainly got their work cut out rebooting a game that had a long gestation from its original release in 2006 anyway, starting life back in 1995. It began life as a demonstration of 3D Realm's own internal engine, but instead was finally released and shipped on id Tech 4, something the game shares in common with the last title from Bethesda in Dishonored 2, which it feels and looks very similar to, with history repeating itself and it no longer coming out on the id Tech powered Void engine but CryEngine. Yes, the very same CryEngine that powered Crysis titles and also the beautiful looking Rise on the original Xbox One release and the subsequent PC release later on in its lifespan. But here, the team have demonstrated that the engine is only a very small part, and it's how you use the tools. This looks nothing like most CryEngine titles you've played, and like I've already covered, does look and feel very reminiscent of id Tech 5 iterated Dishonored 2, which was released recently. It looks and feels like a continuation of that style, along with Half-Life and Half-Life 2 vibes, and clearly Matrix inspiration in the storytelling and plot. As you awake in your penthouse suite, all is not as it seems, and you soon find out that everything is a little bit dodgy. Now, after a very strange and kind of pointless test section at the beginning of the game, you realise that things have gone awry, and in Total Recall style, you meet yourself later on in this 1 hour demo available on both Xbox Live and the PSN Store. For your console, the PC version isn't available on demo, which does raise some suspicions at this point, with some rumblings and rumours suggest it's relatively not the best performer. Something we can see ever so slightly here from the console release, but only on one side. So, being a first contact performance and analysis video, this is only going to dive into the tech and the performance. So let's jack in. Upon boot up, something becomes immediately apparent. Not all things are equal on the machines. Yes, you may want to sit down for the following piece of information, but the Xbox One is a lower resolution than the PS4. Now, for the 3 people surprised by this, you may also want to know that the split is the standard 1600 by 900 versus 1920 by 1080 on the Xbox One and PS4 that we've seen throughout the life of this generation, and certainly is the standard de rigueur of CryEngine in this gen of consoles, leaving the Microsoft machine with less clarity on textures, geometry and the image overall. Some of this is compounded by the fact that the game has a temporal anti-aliasing solution which does soften the image on both machines, giving it a blurred look very similar to what we saw in Dishonored, like I've already said, and other CryEngine titles that use this method. Due to lower information to work with as a base and taps, it thus leaves it with a more unstable image than what we see on the PS4, and image clarity suffers on the whole. Both machines are not perfect and do suffer from image pop and geometry aliasing, but the PS4 is better than the Xbox One due to this higher resolution. So moving on from the resolution side, what else do we see? Well, some nice features from the CryEngine, even if this bloom is a bit overdone and like a nuclear holocaust, and the assets across this cityscape are not the most impressive. It does have some other nice features, with shadow quality having a nice penumbra edge even if it is heavily dithered and therefore quite easy to see, but texture quality and a soft diffuse is used very well across the board. Now, the aliasing does stand out far more on Microsoft console than the PS4, but both are not free of this, as it can shimmer and judder as you move on aliasing and edges and geometry alike. Screen space ambient occlusion is used across both, and they are of equal quality, along with texture filtering, which again looks identical of around the 4 times on both machines, but we do see it look slightly worse on the Xbox One due to the lower resolution, which does lower the asset quality of textures and materials alike. Now, it's all backed up by a temporal anti-aliasing solution that again is a standard process for the CryEngine machine.
Mr. Yu, please make yourself comfortable and we'll be on our way. The TranStar facility is just a short hop. 78 degrees, clear skies all the way.
Good example of the aliasing issues across both formats are evident here when you look at the cityscape, and clearly shows that temporal AA and other solutions will not always solve all your issues if you don't work on your materials and your composites overall. The bloom can be slightly overdone and some of the areas can look quite old, but it's a bit of a mixed bag in its presentation style. There are some nice effects in the game. Per object motion blur and a reasonably decent sample rate is used on both versions, giving smooth movement to action and helping that 30Hz feel a little faster and more fluid. Cube maps are used all over the place and again can be a bit of a mixture when reflecting scenery in objects looking a bit flat and just being locked onto the viewport of the camera. But backing up the game's strong colour palette of greens, reds and blues, it does use a screen space reflection trick to bounce light everywhere, giving you indirect light sources, which works well in the metallic objects and the overall lighting of the game. Animation is again a bit of a mixture, with the actual characters not being very well done, but the mimics themselves are quite fluid when they grab hold or even just flip into inanimate objects as you're playing the game, which tend to add the most excitement and surprise in this short demo thus far. Visually, this is a bit of a mixture. It's definitely an Arcane Studios title and looks like their previous release, albeit toned down within the CryEngine suite, and they have used some of the effects quite well. But the texture qualities do get quite repetitive throughout the game, of the wooden floors, the metal objects and other diffused materials, which look very samey pretty quickly as you play through the title. It's not a bad looking game, but not a great looking one. With another title that it reminds you of in Bioshock Infinite, being a title it doesn't really leap over and above in that visual quality, even though it kind of copies a certain amount of that style in its presentation and story themes. Just before we jump into the performance and control section, there is another comparison to look at, and that is of loading. With standard internal hard drives here, you can see that the game is a pretty long loader in between sections, but the PS4 is ever so slightly faster, to the tune of 10.7%, or around 7 seconds in real world money. Not a huge gain, but a small one, and one which would repeat throughout the game if loading sections are this long between each hubbed off area. So moving into performance, and probably the section that splits them the most. Even if the resolution is persistent, performance issues can affect you much more. So here on the PS4 and the Xbox One, it targets 30 frames per second, 30Hz, which means it regularly hits 33.3 milliseconds across all times. There's no tearing, which means VSync is fully engaged, which is a welcome return, as it seems to be quite regular now on Xbox One titles due to the Scorpio upclock, and therefore making it far easier for them to gain advantage from the additional hardware. But here we see no tearing at all, but we do see performance dips. Once you get into firefights and action here with the glue gun and the mimics, you can see that the Xbox One struggles, and I believe it's more to do with asset streaming and CPU hard drive access than it is to do with actual GPU load. You can see that it dips and stutters around 28 frames per second, but at certain points it can hold much longer. It can then sort itself out and then drop again in sudden long hangs. This doesn't appear to happen on the PS4, but I wouldn't rule it out happening later on in the title. This is an early demo and there may be some patches and updates to come. The PS4 is most likely the one slightly ahead on the curve, but this isn't ideal here on the Xbox One. Both versions do hang for a few seconds at loading sections in the game, which is not unusual, but here the Xbox One struggles in firefights, but I don't believe it's GPU like I say, and there may be sections later on that the PS4 suffers as well. This is the only real heavy section in the demo, but this isn't great for the final release title, but there may be a day one patch that fixes some of these issues we're seeing here. So now we come to input latency, which does suffer on both machines, slightly worse on the Xbox One, but I do have more information to come on that very soon on another video. Just like Dishonored 2, it's very slow and very clunky and very long, probably around 150 to 180 milliseconds here. And it makes precision movement with pressing buttons or hitting objects quite annoying and frustrating, and not as easy or as simple as it should be when you're fighting the control system. This is something that was inherent in the Dishonored 2, and I think it's something to do with how they're programming their engine here. Even though they are using CryEngine 3, I wouldn't be surprised to see this was a triple buffered game to keep the performance levels, which is reasonably solid overall. The PS4 is very solid indeed from this early demo. The Xbox One is solid until it gets to these firefight sections and loading areas, but this may be something they patch in later versions. But the input latency does make the game, I feel, a little more cumbersome and difficult than it should. And that really sums up my overall opinions of the demo. It's a reboot and nothing like previous titles from Prey at all, but it has something there that may interest some. For me, I'm gonna wait and see. Now, it depends if this is popular or not, and whether you guys want me to cover the PS4 Pro and the PC release. Please leave all your thoughts and feedback below if you do. And as always, if you enjoyed my hard work and effort, please like and subscribe and share where appropriate, and give me a thumbs up below and a thumbs down if you didn't, and tell me what you didn't like, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Well, that's exactly what Alex did. The question is, why? You're not going to like what I have to say next.